Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, everyone, again for your participation. This was great. And I think that actually did set the tone for Jeff's session as well. All right. I know this person does not need much introduction, but then still, I am going to stick to the script and I'm going to ensure that I do take a few seconds or maybe half a minute just to give a very, very brief overview of who we have as our speaker next. So, well, our speaker is someone who has, I would like to put it as, has had a journey, which is for me at least no less than a movie or a TV series. He started his career as a fighter pilot in the US Air Force, had a stint as a professor. He has been a vice president for some 11 software companies before he finally decided to, I don't know, settle down or wanted to do something really crazy, drastic. And so he wanted to establish his own company in 2006, which was Scrum Incorporated. He has worked with thousands of companies whilst deploying the Scrum. He recently has launched 2 global trainer programs, which is basically Scrum trainers and certified Scrum at Scale trainers, in addition to creating 2 independent companies in Japan and Scrum @Scale LLC. Well, if I talk about the topic he's gonna talk about today, it's well known that there are the top 3 most valuable companies in the world achieved their success with Scrum, and a massive wave of agile transformations are taking place across globe. On top of it, if we look at the COVID scenario, this has accelerated the need for rapid change. Yet Forbes reports that 47% of the transformations fail. Or if I talk about MIT's research, it shows 75% of these companies go out of business. But that brings us to questions like, why do these failures even occur? Or what can be done to prevent these failures from occurring? Well, these are some burning questions that Jeff will help us get an answer, who's, of course, the inventor and co-creator of Scrum. Please join me in welcoming Jeff. Jeff, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I usually talk about how people can be successful with Scrum, but I find that a lot of people want to know how they can fail with Scrum. I don't know why they want to know that, because I think people should focus on success. But in order to answer these people who want to know how they can fail, I decided to talk about why Agile transformations fail, because Forbes magazine published an article recently and said that 47% of Agile transformations fail. You mentioned my company, Scrum Inc., founded in 2006. It actually was founded because I was coaching a venture capital group, and the CEO said, Jeff, you need to start your own company because all of what you've done needs to be written down. We need to move Scrum out beyond IT and across organizations. Our venture group implements Scrum everywhere. As much as possible, and we get some pretty dramatic results. If you look at Datadog, you can see what happens to some of our companies. Datadog, the valuation of Datadog went up about 300 times. So that's what we like to do. We like to see very successful companies implementing Scrum. So we wrote the book, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time, about how to implement Scrum really well. And one of the companies you mentioned, Apple, is very secretive about their development practices, but I have them in my courses and they tell me, Jeff, the reason that Apple always meets its dates is because they implement Scrum by the book. And I asked them, well, what book? And they said, Scrum, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time, that book. Okay. So it's been very helpful to write this down in a way that people who want to do Scrum really well know exactly how to do it. Of course, you all know that Ken and I work together on the Scrum Guide. There will be a new release of the Scrum Guide. It's already completed. We're planning out when we would announce it right now. one of the key aspects of the guide is it's going to be more general for all types of activities, for all departments and organizations, and not just focused on IT. So we're seeing Scrum spreading across the world. We've also published 2 papers, actually. This is one of them, Agile at Scale, in the Harvard Business Review. So we followed up on the original paper in Scrum. Professor Takeuchi, who is one of the authors of the original paper on Scrum in the Harvard Business Review in 1986, co-authored a new paper called Embracing Agile. And that paper was also followed up by this paper, Agile at Scale. And we've done many transformations all over the world. We wrote a book on all the case studies and Agile transformations that we've done called the Scrum Field Book. Today, I'm going to be talking, though, about another recent book we published, a Scrum book, The Spirit of the Game. This is a patterns book, and it's extremely important to get high-performing Scrum because there's certain patterns in the book that must be implemented to get a hyper-productive Scrum team. And finally, Professors Nonaka and Takeuchi, our mentors, recently published their latest book, The Wise Company. How do you build really great companies, which has really been my focus from the very beginning. Forbes pointed out that 77% of Agile transformations are an implementation of Scrum. And you can see that these transformations are affecting many different parts of organizations. The IT part, a lot of them do it in IT, but more people do Scrum in operations than IT. That's pretty interesting. And almost as many sales teams use Scrum as IT teams. And marketing, business development, finance, the entire spectrum of organizational development today is driven by Scrum in these transformations. If you look at the difference between leading and lagging companies, you find that the biggest difference where the leaders are way ahead are where they implement Agile across the organization. Okay, so you see on the far right, Agile enterprise-wide, 13% of those people are leaders, 6% are laggards. Some of them do it in certain geographies enterprise-wide, so they get the same results there. But if they do it only on specific projects, you find that there's more laggards than leaders in those organizations. So Scrum is really useful for entire organizations. And people always ask me where they do Scrum well, and so I point them to the 3 most valuable companies in the world. I've already mentioned Apple. They became a $1 trillion company in August of 2018. 1 month later, Amazon became a $1 trillion company. And Amazon has 3,300 Scrum teams. They're delivering a new feature more than once a second. And this has made them a unbelievably tough competitor in many different domains. So the biggest bank in Germany had their strategy group in my Scrum training recently, and they said, Amazon is doing loans in Germany. They can do a new loan in 3 minutes and it takes us 3 weeks. We're going to have to exit that business. So they woke up one day and it was game over because of Amazon. And we see the same thing happening in shipping. We see huge impacts in supermarkets. Everywhere that Amazon creates a footprint, their ability to deliver a new feature more than once a second causes them to dominate the market. The third company that became a $1 trillion company in April 2019 is Microsoft. And both Ken and I worked with Microsoft all the way back in 2005. Their goal was to transform all their development tooling to be useful for Scrum. And in order to do that, they wanted to convert all their development to Scrum. And it took them many years to go from 18-month release cycles down to being able to release every day with thousands of people. So these are all Scrum companies. They are the dominant companies in the world. If you go and look at the second tier companies, like Google wrote a great paper on implementing Scrum in AdWords. AdWords makes about 95% of the revenue for Google. So Google has been driven by Scrum. If you look at Facebook, you can go on YouTube and you'll see daily meetings at Facebook. So every major company has used Scrum as a key component to achieving their success. Okay, I'm having trouble. My screen is frozen. Can you hear me?
Yes, Jeff, you're audible.
Yeah.
Video is not visible.
Video is not there, right?
He may have some network issue.
Yeah, seems like his audio just went away.
Yep. Let's wait for him. He has to join back. I think this is as per the plan.
The new normal.
Yeah.
So
But in the meantime, Harshika, is imperialism still the center of our workload?
Yeah, that's actually a good idea. Let me check.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Meanwhile, Jeff joins in. Let me share my screen. And
yeah, sure.
So, yes, it still is. Let me check in case there is any change. Yes, indeed. Oh, there is an interesting one in common sense.
Yeah.
Oh,
Which is not so common nowadays.
absolutely.
And someone write wife too, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, I really would like to know this person.
So I think Jeff is back.
Oh, perfect. I'll stop sharing.
You are on mute, Jeff.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Let's see if what's the last thing you heard?
We move on. Yep.
Yes, this was the last one.
Yep.
Yes, this was the
So
last.
you heard the slide.
Yep.
Okay, so Agile is disrupting all domains, particularly automobiles. In the last month or two, Tesla became the #1 automobile company in the world. Its market capitalization is moving towards twice that of Toyota. And I've been telling people that's coming because Tesla is a very lean company and a very agile company. We've been in there doing training at Tesla. One of my colleagues now is spending a lot of time at Tesla. And one of the things that's happening is that the leading companies are going to have to be agile or they're not going to be leading companies anymore. And the prediction of the MIT Sloan Management Review is that if you're a leading company today, you have a 20% chance of being a leading company in 5 years, because other companies who are agile or more agile are going to dominate. The most interesting thing to me, though, in this Forbes article was the assessment that 47% of Agile transformations fail. So I want to talk about the failures. That's a pretty high percentage. And the MIT Sloan Management Review published a study on what happens to the failures. And they found that 67%, over 2/3 of them, went out of business. They either went bankrupt or required. And what this says is that this Agile transformation is serious business, okay? You are going to determine whether companies go bankrupt or whether they're successful. So Scrum and Agile have gone from being a nice to have to survival, okay? And a lot of people have yet to realize that. And so understanding that this is a survival quest and really getting the focus on getting Scrum working in the way that's going to enable a company to survive is absolutely critical. Now we have the Scrum Guide, which is really directed towards one team. What are the critical components of Scrum that apply to one team? But over the years, I've had people come to me and complain, particularly the leadership at Intel. They said, we've implemented some scaling frameworks and they actually slowed our teams down. So they said, Jeff, you need to write down how to do this in a way that we can get the same performance for one team we can get for thousands of teams. And so that was one of the strong pushes to start to write down how did Ken and I work together in company after company over the last 20 years and actually get them to be high performing at scale. And the three key things that need to be addressed are the ability of an organization to prioritize everything they do, the ability to deliver fast, early, and often, like Amazon, and the ability to change the organization so that they can do that. I call that refactoring the organization. When we go into companies, we can see right away the primary cause of failure. Every company we go into, the first thing we want to do is prioritize everything at the senior management level. Every initiative, every product release, every project. And as soon as we do that, it doesn't matter whether it's GE, Toyota, 3M, many smaller companies, even a restaurant in London. We found that when we implemented Scrum and we started doing Scrum planning, we discovered 1/3 of the restaurant shifts were unnecessary. So in every organization that hasn't prioritized properly, 1/3 of what they're doing, I call dark work. This is stuff that is totally useless. It should not be done. But unless the leadership prioritizes, they don't know that all these pet projects are going on, or at General Electric, we found 1/3 of the developers were just making up backlog. They didn't have good backlog, so they just made it up. Once you get rid of that 30%, which you can do in one day, we know from 20 years of data from the Standish Group that 2/3 of the features that are built are never or rarely used by the customer. So the product owner's Scrum his primary job, she needs to eliminate those junk stories. And it's very hard to do because customers will say they want them. It's only when you deliver them that they won't use them. So product owners have to have strategies to eliminate this waste. For the 25% of features that the customers will use, then we get to the Scrum teams. And getting the Scrum teams operational, working at a really good pace, is critical for those features that are needed. The other aspect of Scrum, or probably the aspect of Scrum that has the biggest impact on project success, is decision latency. how long does it take to make a decision? The Standish Group has over 500,000 projects in their database, and it shows that if this average decision time is an hour, success rate is 58%. If decision time averages 5 hours, the rate drops to 18%. And this is bigger than the difference between Agile and Waterfall. Okay, so the Standish Group says this is the key success factor. If it takes too long to make a decision, you will fail. So in Scrum, we try to push decision-making down to the team as much as possible. But a lot of teams say, we're not empowered. We're not allowed to make a decision. That Agile transformation will fail. And in fact, we have many organizations where the management is waterfall, even though the teams are Scrum. And Professor Carter at Harvard says, in all his research in the last 20 or 30 years, he has never seen a successful Agile transformation long-term that has waterfall management running an Agile implementation. So if you have waterfall management, you are guaranteed to have 100% failure. So that's something for all of you in India really to think about. How do you get Agile leadership in the organizations you work with? The other thing about Scrum at Scale that's really important is that it's designed for every type of activity. We use it in surgery rooms and hospitals. We use it in hardware companies. We use it in oil companies. We use it in rocket companies. We use it everywhere, and we use it in sales and marketing and finance. And most of the IT frameworks out there are focused, or most of the scaling frameworks out there are focused on IT, so they're not useful for a sales team. So that's one of the motivations for creating Scrum at Scale. How do you get a sales team producing 400% more revenue? I had a guy from Microsoft come to my training recently. He said, yeah, Jeff, I came to your training a year ago, Scrum Master training, and I was running a sales team at Microsoft, and we increased our revenue by 400%. And he said, my manager complained that I was making him look bad because my sales team was 400% more revenue than all the other sales teams that he had. And he told me to stop doing Scrum. He said, I was so angry, I quit. But now a year later, they're hiring me back to replace my manager. And so I'm coming to your product owner training because I think we can do even better than 400%. So you see in the really successful organizations, they're using Scrum in sales. Here's where Microsoft started. Back in 2005, they came to me and they said, Jeff, we have our own Agile process, but we only have 4% market share, and Scrum has about 80% market share. So we need to sell tools to Scrum people. That means we want to convert everything to Scrum and help us do that. Well, it took a while because they were rebuilding all the tooling. It took till 2008 before they could release every 4 sprints, and the sprints were too long. And they had these release teams, which really slows things down. But by 2012, they were releasing every sprint. And by 2017, every day. Okay, so one of the good things about Microsoft is that when they embark on something they know needs to happen, it doesn't matter if it takes 10 years, they are going to get there. A lot of companies give up. They get a 20% improvement and then they stop. Okay, those companies are going to fail. You can't get just a 20% improvement and stop, because your competition are going to be companies like Microsoft, and they're going to get many hundreds of percent improvements. So Agile is a journey that must be focused on for years. And the Agile journey never stops. So why did that? Okay, for some reason. So I want to talk about lean, because really Scrum derives from lean. The original paper on Scrum was Takeuchi Tanaka looking at lean companies. And they said the best lean teams are cross-functional teams delivering production prototypes on short intervals. We're going to call that Scrum project management. So from that, when I got together with Ken, after we've been running this first Scrum team for a couple of years, in 1995, we agreed to work together to bring Scrum to the industry. Wrote the first paper on Scrum, presented at Uppsala 95. But the Scrum Guide was just the beginning, because 6 years later, we went to the Agile Manifesto meeting. Ken and I and Mike Beadle representing Scrum. There were 4 of the founders of Extreme Programming and 9 other consultants. And at that time, only Scrum and Agile or Scrum and XP were widely deployed with hundreds of teams. So Scrum and XP are the parents of the Agile Manifesto. And the Agile Manifesto is just a set of values. It's not an operational implementation. So the reason I wrote the Scrum book is to show operationally how you get a high-performing Scrum. Now, to do this at scale, you need not only the Scrum framework, you need patterns. I'm going to be talking about patterns today, patterns of performance. There's certain things you must do to get high performance. The implementation must be lean, because problems at scale are even more difficult than problems at the team level. And lean tooling is fundamental to eliminating impediments. And Scrum at Scale describes how to implement Scrum for many teams in a way that you can get twice the work in half the time at scale. If you go back to when we were first implementing Scrum, all the way back to 1993, I was doing a lot of work with the object management group. And there's a paper that you can read that goes through all that background, which is really a background of Scrum. But I was chairing a committee of hardware and software experts, and we were concerned that the hardware capabilities were increasing exponentially, according to Moore's law, but the software productivity was going up very slowly. So we had this gap. We had all this chip performance, but very little software performance. So how could we close the gap between the hardware and the software? So we took a look at Moore's law. This is a diagram from Moore's first paper. Moore was the founder, one of the 3 founders of Intel. And he had written down in 1962, he could get 10 transistors on a chip, very expensive. By 1965, he could get 100 transistors on a chip. And by 1970, 1,000. And today they put billions of transistors on chips. So we said, how can we do that in software development? So if you look at the top line on the right, if you do Scrum like is in the Scrum Guide, maybe you can get 10 stories done in a sprint. But if you do Scrum and implement the patterns, you can get 100 stories per sprint. And if you do completely automated testing and deployment, as Amazon does, you can get 1,000 stories a sprint. So how can we move down that curve in software just like we did in chips? Well, we have to overcome a fundamental problem called Brook's Law. Fred Brooks ran the IBM 360 operating system project. back in the 1960s, that put IBM on the map as the leading mainframe vendor. And after running a project with hundreds of people for years, he wrote down lessons learned. And one of the lessons he learned was when you add more people to a project, it gets slower. The productivity per person goes down. The same thing is true of adding more teams. If you add more teams to a project, the productivity per team goes down. That happens 100% of the time. That's why they call it Brook's Law. And in fact, we have huge amounts of data on this. Just one example is 491 projects, all the same project size with different size teams. And in that data set, a 6-person team takes 11 months, but a 10-person team takes 17 months. But a lot of people just don't get that. We still have people with 10-person teams, okay? You will never be high productive with a 10-person team. Never in your life. There's a law that says it's impossible. It's called Brook's Law. So you need to follow the law. If you don't, you will fail. Now, amazingly, in 2007, we published a paper on a huge global project. It was actually library systems. This system was already installed in 12,500 of the largest libraries in the world. And we showed that when they doubled the teams, the number of teams, they had many teams in the United States and Utah, also Canada. And then they doubled the number of teams by adding teams in St. Petersburg, Russia. And the productivity per team increased. So when they doubled the number of teams, they got more than double the amount of production. And when the peer reviewers, this was a peer-reviewed research conference, when the academic peer reviewers looked at that paper, they said, Jeff, you write this as if it's about productivity, but this is the first paper ever published showing that you can break Brook's Law. And we've had a number of papers published since then that have demonstrated the same thing. So one of the primary objectives of Scrum at Scale is to break Brook's Law. In order to do that, you need to set up your team structure as a network of small teams. The optimal team size is 4 or 5 people. And multiple teams are coordinated by what we'll talk about as a scrum of scrums, the double lines. And that creates information hiding so that the next node only needs to know, look at that one team. And it allows infinite scalability. And if done properly, as you add more teams, you do not reduce the productivity per team. So this is a network design with information transparency. Everybody can see everything. These kind of architectures are very common. They're seen everywhere in biological systems. They're seen in social networks on the internet. They're seen in chip design. There's huge amounts of research done on this. So this is all research-based. Now, how to get this implemented properly? How would we tell people to implement this properly in a way that they could understand? Because most people never read the research. And even when you read the research, it doesn't really tell you how to do it. So over 10 years ago, I decided we need something more than the Scrum Guide, but it can't be prescriptive. So 2 of the founders of the software patterns movement came to me and they said, Jeff, we want to start a Scrum patterns movement. Will you participate? So I agreed. And so for 10 years, we met with a global team of experts working on patterns which are a problem that has a recommended solution that has worked in multiple organizations and has hard data to back it up. And throughout that 10 years of work, Jim Copeland, who was the product owner of that group, every time we wanted to do a scaling pattern, he said, there are no scaling patterns. If we implement scaling patterns, it will slow people down. They're always specific to an organization. We do not need that. It then became very interesting what happened, because this enables Scrum at scale. First of all, a comment about patterns. Patterns, the software patterns movement was started because of a book named A Pattern Language by Christopher Alexander, an architect of buildings. And in that book, he described there were certain things that make buildings work. And those qualities that make buildings work are the same qualities that make people work, that make towns and cities work, that make the wilderness feel like you're at home. And he said, it's hard to describe what that is, but it has to do with beauty, aliveness, wholeness, being comfortable and free. It's exact, it's precise, it's egoless, and it has an eternal quality to it. You know it when you see it. And he actually did studies, cross-cultural studies all over the world. And he found that 80% of the people in every study could identify these qualities in the same way. So these qualities are universal. The software developers called this quan, the quality without a name, because you can't name it, but you know it when you see it. So a pattern is something that produces quan. One of the first patterns beyond the basic Scrum patterns that you would see in the Scrum Guide was mitosis. We said as soon as a team gets too big, typically around 7 people, we need to split the team, just like a cell splits. A cell splitting is called mitosis. So we need a pattern for splitting teams. And then as soon as we split the teams, we need a pattern for coordinating multiple teams. We call that a scrum of scrums. And that pattern for coordinating teams is going to have other patterns that help it, like organizational sprint pulse, getting all the sprints on the same cadence, a common definition of done, sprint planning and sprint reviews at scale, backlog refinement at scale, birds of a feather sessions, knowledge sharing sessions across the organization, a regular Scrum of Scrums event, which we call the Scale Daily Scrum and Scrum at Scale. So the first example of this was done at IDX in 1995, 96. I joined IDX as their Senior VP of Product Development. I brought Ken in as a consultant, and together we deployed Scrum to hundreds of teams. And we implemented this pattern, Scrum of Scrums. And one of the central features of the pattern is that the Scrum of Scrums, the set of teams, delivers a product increment, a shippable product increment at the end of every sprint. A group of teams delivers like one team. One of the big failure patterns is that we have Scrum of Scrums that are not delivering a shippable product increment at the end of a sprint. Some organizations set up special release teams. The development team builds stuff that doesn't work, and then they throw it over the transom to a release team to try to get it to work. That is a failure mode, okay? If you do that, your competition is going to crush you. So one of the things we're trying to do with Scrum at Scale is to get people to implement the pattern appropriately, okay? And we need a regular scaled daily Scrum with a common definition of done to be able to do that. And if you read the Scrum Patterns book, it describes exactly where this began, exactly how it was put together, and exactly where 47% of Agile transformations, exactly what they're not doing, which is why they're failing, okay? Now, as soon as we got multiple teams, a Scrum of Scrums, we need to have more than one product owner. We need to have a product owner team, just like we have at Toyota, with a chief product owner who's called the Shusha at Toyota. And the Shusha at Toyota owns the product, owns the business. And the function of the president of Toyota is to support the Shushas. So we need a chief product owner with a team that owns the business of the product. That description is in the book. And as soon as we had that pattern, the major failure mode, and we see this everywhere, is that the management disrupts the backlog of the Shusha. At Toyota, that's not allowed. But in many companies, even some of the biggest companies in the world, management is disrupting the product owner team, and that causes failure. So some of the biggest scaled implementations at SAP, for example, with over 2,000 Scrum teams, they said, unless you have a meeting of the managers with the Shusha and a team where they agree to support the backlog, management agrees to support the backlog, the Agile transformation will fail. So we had to have this pattern, we called it a MetaScrum. This is where on a regular cadence, the product owner team meets with the management at that level, and they come to agreement on we're going to support one backlog. Very critical pattern. And the final pattern is not a new pattern at all. The leadership team for the Agile implementation, we call it an executive action team, but it is a Scrum team, exactly as described in the Scrum Guide. So it's not a new pattern at all. But the Agile implementation needs to be led by Agile leaderships. If you don't have that, as Professor Carter says, you get 100% failure. Now, this Agile leadership team needs to run like a Scrum. Their backlog is the transformation of the organization. They have a product owner, they have a Scrum master, they have a backlog. And if any of the teams below them have a problem they can't solve, that very day, it hits the executive action team. That radically reduces decision latency. And as I said, getting decisions done fast is the primary success factor for projects worldwide. So the executive action team is a critical piece of the implementation. So there you have it. The only things you need to be successful are mitosis, Scrum team, Scrum of Scrums, product owner team, MetaScrum, executive action team. If you don't have those, you will fail. So in our training in Scrum Scale, we look at the what we call the Scrum Master cycle, the team process itself, the continuous improvement and impediment removal, the cross-team coordination, the delivery, the product feedback. We also look at the product owner side, starting with a strategic vision, prioritizing portfolios, all the projects in the organization, breaking backlog down for an individual product, creating a release plan, releasing it to the customer, getting feedback. It's run by two executive teams. One, the executive action team, which is operations. The other is the executive MetaScrum, which is the prioritization team. And we analyze how well each component is implementing the patterns. This enables us to get twice the work in half the time at scale. So one of the most interesting case study we published recently was with Quicken Loans. Quicken Loans is the largest mortgage provider in the United States, probably in the world. They have 17,000 people. They implemented SAFE with 26 release trains. It is the best SAFE implementation I've seen ever because they got 100% improvement in production. They cut cycle time in half. I've never seen that done with SAFE anywhere else, not at scale. The leader of one of the most important release trains, they call it the brand marketing release train, the whole front end of Quicken Loans that sells the product, came to Scrum at Scale, trained the trainer session, became a Scrum at Scale trainer, went back and implemented Scrum at Scale. He didn't get rid of SAFE, he just used Scrum at Scale as the tuning mechanism to improve the SAFE and made sure he had the patterns implemented properly and got a 300% improvement over the already double performance of SAFE. So what that shows is it doesn't matter what scaling framework you have, Scrum at Scale can improve that by over 300% because it focuses, it's a meta framework. It focuses on, are the patterns implemented well? It's like the Scrum Guide. It has the essential. These patterns create what we call a minimum viable bureaucracy. That minimal viable bureaucracy enables us to add teams without reducing the performance per team. We can achieve linear scalability. It will radically reduce Agile transformation failure. It will deliver twice the work in half the time at scale. And it really is the secret not only to your Agile transformation success, but also to the future survival of your company. So that's basically what I'm going to talk about today. I don't know if you want to have some questions. Ashika, if we have time.
Thank you, Jeff. Yes, we do. We do have time. So guys, if you have questions, I can actually pull you in and unmute and you can ask your questions.
So it looks like that people were listening so in such a way that they actually forgot about questions.
Yes, questions. Even I forgot about that. Till the time Jeff said Harshika, is like, yes, yes.
So people are putting a message on the chat window that say don't stop him, even if we have to skip that the tea break or that coffee break.
Yeah.
So we are okay with it. But I think Meena has a question.
Yes, yes. Meena, you could unmute yourself, please, and ask Jeff your question.
Hey, this is Meena. I should say that was mesmerizing. Thank you for that session. I just wanted to ask you, am I audible?
Yes, Meena, you are.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you, I come from the world of fintech rather from banking. So I just want to ask you, agile and banking, it doesn't go well thanks to the corona and the fintech revolution, which is changing. But generally, have you seen any place where agile is not implementable or it's not recommended at all?
Okay, the first prototype of Scrum at Scale and Scrum was in a banking company running 150 banks.
Wow.
I was the CTO. That was in 1983.
Okay.
And today, I've already mentioned that the biggest bank in Germany has been put out of the small loan business by Amazon. So if you want to survive in a bank, you better start scrumming because Amazon is coming.
Sure. I will call you as a consultant. I am just consulting for one of the largest banks. So I will call you for this recommendation. Thank you.
Yes. Give us a call, yeah.
Thanks, Meena. Thanks, Jeff. Jeff, we have Jehan Kothari now. Jehan, you could unmute yourself and ask your question.
Sure. Thank you.
And by the way, we are not able to see the people who are asking question. So if Jeff
Okay.
is visible, we are visible. I think you should also make a switch on your
Yeah,
camera.
sure. I can't see that option. I only chat, lower end, and mute.
It's helpful if you write the questions in Slack as well to make sure I understand it clearly.
Go ahead, Jan.
Hi. So yes, am I audible?
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you, and Jeff, thank you for this wonderful session. I have read your book, and I saw like how you have switched your domains, right? I mean, you were like a pilot, and then you came into the biology, and then you came to the Scrum framework, and then trained so many organizations. So as a Scrum Master, like when we change the domains, when we shift domains from say engineering to banking to medical or any, so what are the things that as a Scrum Master we should look, I mean, as the challenges we should consider ourselves and prepare ourselves when we shift the domains especially?
Well, every domain has its individual, unique situation, okay? So for example, we were brought into a surgery center in Boston, one of the biggest hospitals, and the head of the lean practice at the hospital said, we think Scrum can help us. We've been trying to shorten the time between surgeries for 20 years. You know, the wheels out to wheels in the surgery room. And it's been an hour for 30 years and we can't get it shorter. Do you think we can help it with Scrum? So we said, yeah, okay. So we brought in a couple of coaches. The first thing we did was create we had an executive MetaScrum, okay? So the leadership of the hospital said, okay, this is the top priority. This is the situation. And then we created an executive action team, the leadership that was responsible for the implementation. So we had the head surgeon for the hospital, the head hospital administrator, the head of the lean practice. They were going to be the operational leaders, and they brought together all the surgery people, hundreds of them. We did a briefing. Here's what we're going to be doing. Here's how we're going to do it. We're going to start with a surgery pod, which is 3 surgery rooms. And we're going to run a sprint every surgery. So at the beginning of the surgery, we're going to do sprint planning. At the end, we're going to do a sprint review and retrospective. And we're going to try to shorten that time.
Okay.
In 2 weeks, we had it down to 1/2 an hour. Now, what was the biggest impediment? when we got the team together, which is basically the surgeon, the nurses, the cleaning people, we found that the head surgeon was not listening to the cleaning people. He thought they were substandard people, right? Cleaning people, you know.
Correct, correct.
We had to coach the surgeon. The cleaning people are the most important people on the team. They're the ones that are going to help figure this out. They are equals in the team meeting.
Okay, correct.
So chief surgeon, you need to listen to them. And then we had to coach the cleaning people. You need to be clear. You need to speak up. You need to tell the chief surgeon what has to happen.
Correct, correct.
That created a breakthrough. Now, what is the impact of that 1/2 hour? 50% of 50% of the revenue of a hospital is surgery. The revenue of that hospital was $7 billion a year. By cutting that time in half, we're increasing the number of surgeries. We got a 10% increase in revenue opportunity. 10% increase in revenue is $700 million.
Yeah.
So we took 3 coaches working for 2 weeks, created a $700 million opportunity for the hospital. This is the power of Scrum, but we had to figure out, how does a surgery center work? And what are the big problems, right? The big problems with the surgeons. And we have to remove those impediments, okay?
Correct, correct. Thank you. Thank you so much. And it's an honor to listen and interact with you directly, Jeff. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll move on to the next person. Sandeep, if you could unmute yourself and quickly ask a question.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, first of all, again, it's really an honor to interact with you and listen to you to a live session. The question which I have is, I come from an automotive company wherein, the automotive companies are now obsessed with electrification and adding more and more mechatronics and all. So in a setup like this, wherein software is just a part of the bigger system, in such a setup, often what the participants say is, okay, you guys who are from the software side, you can adopt Agile and Scrum and you can do this periodic delivery, get some feedback. But we, the ones who are developing the hardware, we are the ones who are developing the mechatronic parts. We cannot integrate everything together and do stuff like you guys are doing. So what would you suggest? How should Scrum and Agile be adopted in such kind of a setup wherein where software is just one part of the system and there are bigger hardware and mechanical parts involved in the whole setup?
Okay, could you see my screen?
Oh, yes, I do.
Who's the #1 automobile company in the world?
It's clearly Tesla.
Tesla.
Mm-hmm.
Why did Toyota fall to #2?
Perhaps they did not adapt well.
They're not agile.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're trying to get agile. We're actually, Scrum Japan is actually the trainers in Toyota Research at Toyota City. So we're working to get them agile. Now, what did the hardware guys at Tesla do?
Yep, that's something interesting to know.
They are upgrading that car constantly. At least every quarter, there are major upgrades to systems in that car. Even though it looks like the same car, every quarter that car has really significant upgrades. So they're prototyping and testing new capabilities in that car every week. They are upgrading the car through the downloading a new operating system for the car. I mean, I get a download of a new Tesla operating system in my car about twice a month. So the software guys are releasing every 2 weeks. But the hardware guys, those software guys actually alter the hardware. You know, some of their releases have made the car go 10% faster or brake 30% quicker, because the hardware guys are working closely with the software guys and they figure out how to optimize the whole system. And the actual hardware itself is, as I said, being upgraded on the assembly line, major upgrades at least every quarter. So my suggestion to the automobile, the hardware guys in your auto company, is they better take a look at Tesla, because if they don't, Tesla is coming for them.
Understand. Thanks for the suggestion. Would there be any specific book that you can recommend or any specific resources, especially which can be referred to these hardware people and the senior management?
There is a book called Scrum and Hardware, and maybe I can put a link to a free copy. It's going to take me a minute after we're done here, but I can search for a link for a free Scrum and Hardware book.
Thank you so much. It's an honor, and God bless you. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jeff, for your session. I don't have words to describe how it was, but I think the comments are enough for letting you know how all of us felt. I think all of us were mesmerized, at the least.